The ink on the divorce papers was barely dry when Preston threw them across the mahogany desk, sliding them toward the woman who had spent 5 years ironing his shirts and raising his social standing. He didn't just want a divorce. He wanted total annihilation. He wanted to strip her of the very clothes on her back. "You were a waitress when I found you, Lydia," he sneered, swirling the scotch in his crystal glass. "And you'll be a waitress when you leave." He thought she was nobody, a helpless orphan with 0 connections and an empty bank account. He thought he held all the cards. But Preston was about to learn a painful lesson in genealogy. He forgot that while some people scream about their power, others whisper, and the people who whisper are the ones you should be terrified of. The rain battered against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse on 57th Street, blurring the lights of Manhattan into smeared streaks of gold and grey. Inside, the air was temperature-controlled, scented with expensive leather and the faint metallic tang of ozone. But Lydia felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. She sat on the edge of the sprawling velvet sofa, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She was wearing a simple navy dress, one she had bought off the rack at a department store 3 years ago. Across the room, standing by the fireplace that cost more than most people's homes, was Preston, her husband of 5 years. Today was their anniversary. "Did you hear me, Lydia?" Preston's voice was calm, almost bored. He didn't turn to face her. He was too busy adjusting the cufflinks on his bespoke suit, platinum, inlaid with onyx. "I heard you," Lydia said softly. Her voice was steady, betraying none of the vertigo spinning in her skull. "Good. Then we don't need to make this theatrical," Preston said, finally turning around. He was a handsome man, with the kind of sharp, predatory jawline that graced the covers of Forbes and Fortune. He was the CEO of Sterling Dynamics, a tech conglomerate that had just secured a multi-billion-dollar government defense contract. "The papers are on the table. My lawyer, Thornton, drafted them this morning. It's a standard separation agreement based on the pre-nuptial." Lydia looked at the thick stack of documents. "We didn't sign a prenuptial, Preston." Preston smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It was the smile of a shark sensing blood in the water. "Oh, but we did. Remember the documents you signed for the life insurance policy 2 months before the wedding? The ones buried in the appendix? You really should read what you signed, darling." Lydia felt the blood drain from her face. "You tricked me." "I protected my assets," Preston corrected, walking over to the bar cart. He poured himself a drink, the amber liquid glinting in the low light. "Let's be realistic. When I met you, you were serving coffee at a diner in Jersey. You had no family, no degree, and holes in your shoes. I gave you a life of luxury. I upgraded you. But now," he took a sip, "I've outgrown you." The brutality of it was breathtaking. There was no shouting, no throwing of vases, just a cold, corporate dismissal. "Is it Jessica?" Lydia asked. Preston paused, the glass halfway to his mouth. "Jessica is merely a symptom, not the cause. She understands my world, Lydia. She's a VP of marketing. She has ambition. You're content to garden and volunteer at the library. You're an anchor, and I need to fly." The elevator doors at the far end of the penthouse chimed softly. They slid open, and a woman stepped out. She was tall, blonde, and wearing a red dress that looked like it had been painted on. It was Jessica. She didn't look ashamed. She looked triumphant. "Honey, the movers are downstairs," Jessica said to Preston, ignoring Lydia entirely. "Should I send them up?" "Give us 5 minutes," Preston said. Lydia stood up slowly. "You're moving me out. Tonight. The apartment is in my name, Lydia. The accounts are in my name. The car is company property. Preston listed them off on his fingers. "Thornton has been generous, though. We've booked you a room at the Motel 6 near the airport for 3 nights. After that, you're on your own." Lydia looked from Preston to Jessica. She saw the smirk on the other woman's face, the utter lack of empathy in her husband's eyes. They expected her to cry. They expected her to beg, to scream, to fall to her knees and plead for a monthly allowance. Instead, Lydia smoothed the fabric of her skirt. She walked over to the table and picked up the pen lying next to the divorce papers. "You want a divorce, Preston?" she asked. "I do." "And you want to go to trial? You want to do this publicly?" Preston laughed, a bark of amusement. "Trial? Lydia, look at you. You can't afford a lawyer who could even find the courthouse, let alone fight me. Yes, if you refuse to sign, we go to trial, and I will crush you." Lydia uncapped the pen. She didn't sign the papers. Instead, she wrote a single phone number on the top page, then capped the pen and set it down. "I won't sign," Lydia said quietly. "I'll see you in court." She turned and walked toward the private elevator. She didn't pack a bag. She didn't take the diamond earrings she was wearing. She unclasped them and left them on the side table. She walked out with nothing but the clothes on her back and the strange, quiet dignity that had always annoyed Preston. "You're making a mistake," Preston called after her as the doors closed. "You're going to starve." Lydia watched the gap between the doors seal shut, obscuring her husband's face. She closed her eyes and exhaled a breath she felt she had been holding for 5 years. "No, Preston," she whispered to the empty elevator car. "I'm just going home." The Motel 6 was exactly as promised. Drab, smelling of stale cigarette smoke and industrial cleaner, with the constant roar of airplanes taking off overhead. Lydia sat on the lumpy mattress, staring at the peeling beige wallpaper. For 5 years, she had played the role perfectly. The orphan, the grateful wife, the simple girl who was just happy to be rescued. It hadn't been a lie, exactly. She had wanted a simple life. She had wanted to escape the suffocating weight of her heritage, the bodyguards, the board meetings, the constant fear of kidnapping that had plagued her childhood. She had run away to find something real, something built on love, not portfolio diversification. She thought she found it with Preston. She thought he loved her, the waitress who made him laugh, not the net worth she could bring him. She was wrong. Her phone buzzed. It was a cheap prepaid model she had bought at a convenience store an hour ago, with the cash she had tucked in her shoe. She dialed the number she knew by heart, a number that hadn't changed in 30 years. It rang twice. "Office of the chairman," a crisp British voice answered. "Who is calling?" "Hello, Alfred," Lydia said. There was a silence on the other end, a silence so profound it felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. Then, a tremble. Miss Lydia? Is that you?" "It's me, Alfred. Is my father in?" Yes, he is. He has been waiting for this call for 7 years, miss. Hold on, please, hold on." A moment later, a deep, gravelly voice came on the line. It was a voice that had commanded senates and shifted global markets. "Lydia?" "Hi, Dad. Where are you?" The voice was urgent, fierce. "Are you safe?" "I'm safe. But I made a mistake, Dad. You were right about him. You were right about everything." "Preston Sterling," the father said. The name dripped with venom. "I've been tracking him. I respected your wishes to stay away, Lydia. I let you play house. But I've been watching. He served me divorce papers today," Lydia said, her voice finally cracking. "He kicked me out. He thinks I'm a nobody. He's going to try to humiliate me in court." "Humiliate you?" The low chuckle that followed was terrifying. He wants a war? We will give him a war. Where are you? A motel near JFK. Stay there. I'm sending the jet. And Lydia? Yes. Call your brothers. Tell them the vacation is over. 3 weeks later, the legal machinery of New York City began to grind. Preston Sterling sat in the plush leather chair of his lawyer's office. Thornton, a man who looked like a bulldog in a pinstripe suit, was grinning. "It's a slam dunk, Preston," Thornton said, tossing a file onto the desk. "She's filed for a contestation, but she has a public defender, a guy named Samuel Higgins. I looked him up. He works out of a strip mall in Queens. His biggest case last year was a slip and fall at a grocery store." Preston laughed, checking his Rolex. "Pathetic. She's probably hoping I'll settle just to avoid the nuisance. What is she asking for?" "Nothing specific yet," Thornton said. "Just equitable distribution, standard boilerplate language. But here's the kicker. She's requested that the trial be open to the public. No sealing of records." Preston frowned. "Why?" "She probably thinks the bad publicity will scare you. She thinks if she cries in front of a gallery, you'll cut a check to make her go away. It's a desperate move." "Let it be open," Preston decided, his eyes narrowing. "Let the whole world see what happens when a gold digger tries to take on Sterling dynamics. I want Jessica in the front row. I want the press there. We're going to paint her as unstable, greedy, and incompetent." "Done," Thornton said. "The preliminary hearing is set for Tuesday. Judge Weatherby is presiding." "Weatherby?" Preston smirked. "I played golf with him last month. He owes me a favor for that donation to his re-election campaign. Then you have nothing to worry about. By the time we're done, Lydia will be lucky if she leaves the courtroom with her dignity, let alone a dime." Preston stood up, buttoning his jacket. He felt invincible. His stock price was up 15%. His mistress was young and exciting, and he was about to shed the last dead weight from his past. He had no idea that 3,000 miles away, in a chateau in the Swiss Alps, a meeting was taking place that would redraw the map of his entire existence. The New York County Supreme Court was buzzing. The divorce of a high-profile tech mogul like Preston Sterling was red meat for the tabloids. Paparazzi swarmed the steps, cameras flashing, as Preston emerged from his black SUV. He wore a charcoal suit, tailored to perfection, and held Jessica's hand. She was beaming, soaking in the attention. "Mr. Sterling, is it true your wife cheated on you?" a reporter shouted. "Mr. Sterling, are you hiding assets?" Preston just smiled and gave a small wave, projecting the image of a magnanimous victim. Inside, the courtroom was packed. The gallery was filled with reporters, onlookers, and Preston's supporters. On the right side, at the plaintiff's table, Preston sat with Thornton and a team of 3 junior associates. They had stacks of binders, laptops, and confident smirks. On the left side, at the defendant's table, sat Lydia. She was alone. Well, not entirely alone. Sitting next to her was Samuel Higgins, the public defender. He looked exactly as Thornton had described, disheveled, wearing a suit that was a size too big, nervously shuffling a small stack of papers. He looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. Lydia, however, looked different. She wasn't wearing the department store clothes anymore. She was wearing a black dress. It was simple, severe, and impeccably cut. Her hair was pulled back in a tight chignon. She didn't look at the gallery. She didn't look at Preston. She stared straight ahead at the judge's bench. "All rise," the bailiff bellowed. Judge Harold B. Weatherby swept into the room, his robes billowing. He took his seat and peered over his spectacles. He offered a subtle nod to Preston, a clear acknowledgement of their golf game relationship. "We are here for the matter of Sterling versus Sterling," Judge Weatherby droned. "Preliminary motions. Mr. Thornton, you may proceed." Thornton stood up, buttoning his jacket. Your Honor, this is a simple case. We have a prenuptial agreement. The defendant, Miss Lydia, well, Mrs. Sterling for now, is attempting to invalidate a legal contract to extort money from my client. We move for immediate dismissal of her contestation and enforcement of the separation agreement. Judge Weatherby nodded. Mr. Higgins, do you have a response? The public defender, Higgins, stood up. He knocked over his water cup, scrambling to catch it. A few people in the gallery laughed. Preston covered a snicker with a cough. Yes, Your Honor, Higgins stammered. We believe the prenup was signed under duress and fraudulent pretenses. We request full discovery into Mr. Sterling's finances. Fraudulent pretenses? Thornton scoffed. Your Honor, she's grasping at straws. My client is a busy man. He runs a Fortune 500 company. This drag-out process is damaging his reputation. Judge Weatherby looked at Lydia with disdain. Mrs. Sterling, do you have any proof of fraud, or are you just wasting the court's time? Lydia stood up. Higgins tried to stop her, but she waved him off. She spoke clearly, her voice projecting to the back of the room without a microphone. Your Honor, the fraud lies in the valuation of assets, Lydia said. My husband claims his net worth is $300 million. I believe it is significantly higher, and that he has moved assets offshore to the Cayman Islands and Liechtenstein to hide them from marital distribution. Preston froze. He had done that. But how could she possibly know? He had buried those accounts deep. Thornton jumped up. Objection! Pure speculation. Sustained, Weatherby said quickly. Mrs. Sterling, without evidence, you cannot make such accusations. I am inclined to grant the motion for the prenup enforcement. I have a witness, Lydia said. A witness? Weatherby frowned. We are in preliminary hearings. Who is your witness? Not a witness to the accounts, Lydia corrected. A witness to my character. Mr. Thornton claims I am a gold digger. I would like to introduce a character witness to refute that claim before you rule. Thornton rolled his eyes. Who is it? Her manager from the diner? Lydia turned toward the heavy double doors at the back of the courtroom. No, she said softly. My brother. The doors swung open. The room went silent. Walking down the center aisle wasn't a diner manager. It was a man in his early 30s, wearing a suit that cost more than Preston's car. He had the same dark eyes as Lydia, but his face was harder, scarred slightly above the eyebrow. He walked with a military precision, flanked by two men who were clearly private security. But it wasn't just his appearance. It was the face. Preston gasped. He recognized the man. He had seen him on the news just last week. It was Julian Sinclair, the CEO of Sinclair Global, the largest private equity firm in Europe, a man known as the Butcher of Berlin for how ruthlessly he dismantled companies. Julian walked through the gate, ignoring the bailiff. He walked right up to the defense table and placed a hand on Lydia's shoulder. He looked at Preston, and for the first time in his life, Preston Sterling felt true fear. Your Honor, Julian said, his voice smooth and terrifyingly calm. I apologize for the tardiness. My jet had trouble getting clearance at Teterboro. I am Julian Sinclair, and I am here to represent my sister, Lydia Sinclair Sterling, as co-counsel. The courtroom erupted. Order! Order! Judge Weatherby banged his gavel, his eyes wide. Mr. Sinclair, you are related to the defendant? She is the only daughter of Alexander Sinclair, Julian announced, turning to face the stunned gallery. And I believe Mr. Sterling. He locked eyes with Preston. You have something that belongs to our family. The silence in the courtroom was shattered by the frantic whispering of reporters. The name Sinclair had sucked the oxygen right out of the room. In the world of high finance, the Sinclairs weren't just rich. They were an institution. They were old money in the way that made the Rockefellers look like lottery winners. They owned shipping lines, rare earth mines in Africa, and half the commercial real estate in London. And, famously, they were aggressively private. Preston Sterling stared at the man standing next to his wife. He felt a bead of cold sweat trickle down his spine beneath his starch-stiffened shirt. He looked at Lydia. She was still sitting with her back straight, but the air of fragility was gone. In its place was a steely resolve that Preston suddenly realized he had mistaken for submissiveness all these years. "Mr. Thornton," Judge Weatherby stammered, his face pale. Did you know about this connection?" Thornton, the bulldog lawyer, looked like a puppy who had been kicked. He was furiously flipping through his files. Your Honor, I had no knowledge of the defendant's maiden name being Sinclair. Her identification documents listed her as Lydia Smith. "My mother's name," Lydia said, her voice cutting through the noise. She stood up, and Julian, her brother, stepped back to give her the floor. "I used it to avoid exactly this kind of circus. I wanted a life where people didn't look at my bank account before they looked at my face. I thought I found that with you, Preston." She turned her gaze to her husband. It wasn't a look of hate. It was a look of profound disappointment. "But you didn't love Lydia Smith, the waitress," she continued. "You loved that I was small. You loved that I was manageable. And the moment I became inconvenient, you tried to throw me away like trash." Julian leaned forward, resting his knuckles on the table. "My sister chose to live humbly. That was her prerogative. But make no mistake, Mr. Sterling. By trying to cheat her out of her fair share of the marital assets, you are not stealing from a former waitress. You are stealing from the Sinclair estate. And we take theft very, very seriously." "This is ridiculous." Preston stood up, his voice cracking slightly. "She lied about her identity. That's fraud. The marriage should be annulled." "On what grounds?" Julian countered smoothly. "She never legally changed her name on the marriage license, or because you failed to do a background check on the woman you claimed to love. There is no law against being wealthy and quiet, Preston. But there are many laws against hiding assets in a divorce, and we know about the shell company in the British Virgin Islands. Blue Heron Holdings, isn't it?" Preston's face went grey. Blue Heron Holdings was his escape hatch. It held $40 million of skimmed profits. Judge Weatherby cleared his throat, sensing the wind changing direction rapidly. He knew the Sinclairs could end a career with a phone call. "Given the complexity of the new developments, I am inclined to grant the motion for full discovery. The prenuptial agreement is hereby suspended, pending an investigation into the allegations of coercion and hidden assets." "Suspended?" Thornton squawked. "Your Honor, that is irregular." "Sit down, Mr. Thornton," Weatherby snapped, "or I will hold you in contempt." Julian snapped his fingers. The doors at the back of the courtroom opened again. This time, 6 men and women in dark suits walked in. They carried briefcases and radiated competence. "Mr. Higgins," Julian said to the stunned public defender, shaking his hand warmly. "You have done an admirable job holding the line. We will take it from here. And don't worry, your student loans have been paid off as of this morning. Thank you for your service." Higgins blinked, his mouth open, as he was gently ushered aside. The Sinclair legal team, partners from the top firm in London, swarmed the table. Preston sank back into his chair. He looked at Jessica. She wasn't smiling anymore. She was looking at Lydia with a mixture of fear and calculation. "We're done for today," Julian said, checking his watch. "Preston, have your forensic accountants ready. My team will be at Sterling Dynamics at 8 a.m. tomorrow. Try not to shred anything. We'll know." As the court adjourned, the reporters surged forward, shouting questions. "Lydia! Lydia!" Preston tried to slip out the side exit, but a cameraman blocked his path. "Mr. Sterling, did you know your wife was worth more than your entire company?" Preston didn't answer. He shoved past the camera, dragging a terrified Jessica with him. He needed a drink. He needed a strategy. And for the first time in 5 years, he needed to pray. The following morning, the headquarters of Sterling Dynamics looked less like a tech company and more like a crime scene. Lydia walked through the glass revolving doors, flanked by her brother and 3 forensic auditors. The receptionist, a young woman named Sarah who had always been kind to Lydia when she dropped off Preston's lunch, looked up in shock. "Mrs. Sterling?" Sarah gasped. Mr. Sterling said you were banned from the building." "Mr. Sterling doesn't own the building anymore, Sarah," Lydia said gently. "Technically the bank does, and my family owns the bank." It was a slight exaggeration, but effective. Lydia walked past the security desk. The guards, seeing the entourage and the aura of authority, didn't dare stop her. They took the elevator to the top floor, the executive suite. When the doors opened, the sound of shouting was audible immediately. Preston was in the middle of the bullpen, screaming at his CFO, a frantic man named Carter. "Fix it!" Preston was yelling, his face red. "I don't care how you do it. Just hide the transaction logs for the government contract. If they see we double-billed the DOD, we're all going to prison. It's too late, Preston." Lydia's voice rang out across the open-plan office. The entire floor went silent. 50 employees turned to watch. Preston spun around. He looked ragged. He clearly hadn't slept. "You!" he hissed. "You can't be here. This is corporate espionage." "This is court-ordered discovery," Julian corrected, handing a warrant to Carter. "We are here to clone the servers, all of them, especially the ones related to the Project Aegis government defense contract." Preston's knees actually buckled. He grabbed the edge of a desk to steady himself. "Lydia, please," he said, his voice dropping to a desperate whisper. "Can we talk? Just us? In my office?" Lydia looked at Julian. He nodded slightly. "5 minutes," Julian said. "I'll be right outside." Lydia followed Preston into his massive corner office, the same office where he had thrown the divorce papers at her just weeks ago. It smelled of stale coffee and fear now. Preston closed the door and turned to her, his eyes wide and pleading. "Lydia, honey, look, I messed up. I know I did. The pressure of the company. It got to me. I took you for granted. But we can fix this. You don't want to destroy me. Think of the good times. The trip to Napa. The first Christmas." Lydia watched him, feeling a strange detachment. She realized she was looking at a stranger. "I am thinking of those times, Preston. I'm thinking about how I cooked the turkey while you texted Jessica under the table." Preston flinched. Jessica meant nothing. She was just stress relief. "I'll fire her. I'll fire her today. I'll sign whatever you want. We can renew our vows. With your family's backing, imagine what we could do. We could be the ultimate power couple. Sterling and Sinclair." He was trying to make a deal. Even now, facing ruin, he was trying to leverage her heritage for his own gain. "You still don't get it," Lydia said, sadness tinging her voice. "I didn't want a power couple life. I wanted a husband, and you wanted a servant." "I can change," Preston begged, stepping closer, reaching for her hand. Lydia stepped back. "It's too late. And Preston, I know about the bribes. Preston froze. What bribes? The bribes you paid to the zoning commissioner to get the new factory approved, and the kickbacks from the suppliers in Taiwan. My brother's team found the emails an hour ago. You used the joint checking account, the one you thought I never looked at, to pay the initial wire fees. Preston stumbled back, collapsing onto his leather sofa. You checked the joint account? I checked everything, Lydia said. I was your wife, Preston. I paid the bills. I organized the files. You thought I was stupid because I didn't have a fancy degree. You thought because I was quiet, I was blind. But the quiet ones are the ones who observe. The door to the office opened. It wasn't Julian. It was Jessica. She was holding a cardboard box filled with her personal items. She looked at Preston, huddled on the couch, and then at Lydia, standing tall and immaculate. He's going to blame me, Jessica said, her voice flat. She looked directly at Lydia. He's already typing up a memo saying I authorized the illegal transfers without his knowledge. Jessica, shut up! Preston roared, jumping up. Jessica ignored him. She walked over to Lydia and placed a flash drive on the desk. What is this? Lydia asked. Audio recordings, Jessica said. He records all his meetings, including the ones where he planned how to hide assets from you, and the ones where he talks about defrauding the shareholders. Jessica looked at Preston with pure venom. You promised me I'd be the next Mrs. Sterling. You promised me protection. If I'm going down, Preston, I'm taking you with me. Lydia looked at the flash drive, then at Jessica. Why give this to me? Because you're the only one who can stop him, Jessica said. And because he called me a cheap replacement on the phone this morning when he thought I wasn't listening. Lydia picked up the drive. She looked at her husband one last time. Goodbye, Preston. She walked out of the office. Julian was waiting. She handed him the drive. Is this what I think it is? Julian asked. It's the nail in the coffin, Lydia replied. Let's go. I want to buy a burger, a real one. As they walked to the elevator, the sound of Preston screaming at Jessica echoed down the hallway, a pathetic, dying sound of a man who had lost everything because he underestimated the woman he slept next to every night. But the war wasn't over yet. Preston was cornered, and a cornered rat bites. He had one last card to play, a card that involved Lydia's father and a secret from the past that even Lydia didn't know. Desperation is a dangerous drug, and Preston Sterling was overdosing on it. With the evidence from the flash drive now in the hands of the district attorney, an indictment was inevitable. But Preston wasn't built to accept defeat. He was a man who believed that every person had a price and every closet had a skeleton. He spent 24 hours locked in his study at the Hamptons house, the only property the court hadn't seized yet, scouring old financial records he had retained from a merger 3 years ago. The merger had involved a subsidiary of Sinclair Global. It was a tenuous link, but he found something. A series of payments made in 1998 from Alexander Sinclair's personal trust to a group in Colombia that was flagged on several international watch lists. Preston smiled. It was money laundering, or funding a coup. It didn't matter what it was. It looked bad. It looked like the kind of thing that would destroy the pristine reputation of the Sinclair dynasty. He picked up the phone and dialed Lydia's new number, which his private investigator had acquired. Lydia, he said when she answered. You shouldn't be calling me, Preston. My lawyer advised you to speak only through counsel. This isn't about lawyers, Preston said, his voice regaining that silky, arrogant confidence. This is about your father, Alexander. There was a pause on the line. What about him? I have the ledger, Lydia. The 1998 Colombian transfers. $5 million sent to the Fuerzas Armadas. That's funding a paramilitary group. That's a federal crime. If I release this to the New York Times, your father goes to prison for financing terrorism, and your family's assets get frozen globally. He heard her breath hitch. He had her. What do you want? She asked quietly. I want the flash drive destroyed, Preston said. I want you to drop the divorce contestation. I keep the company, I keep the house, and you sign a statement saying you were mentally unstable and fabricated the fraud allegations. You walk away with nothing, and your father's reputation stays intact. Meet me, Lydia said. Tonight, 9:00 p.m. at the airfield in Teterboro. Come alone. Done. Preston hung up. He felt a rush of adrenaline. He had just checkmated the Sinclairs. That night, the airfield was bathed in the harsh blue light of the runway markers. A private hangar stood open, a sleek Gulfstream jet parked inside. Preston pulled up in his rental car, his Ferrari had been towed that morning, and walked into the hangar, clutching a briefcase containing the copies of the ledger. Lydia was waiting. She stood near the landing gear, wearing a heavy trench coat against the biting wind. Julian stood next to her. You brought the bulldog, Preston sneered, looking at Julian. Doesn't matter. Do you have the withdrawal papers? We have them, Julian said calmly. But before we sign anything, we wanted you to meet the man you're threatening. Preston frowned. What? The stairs of the Gulfstream lowered with a hydraulic hiss. An older man descended. He walked with a cane, but his movement was powerful, deliberate. He wore a wool coat and a flat cap. His face was lined with age, but his eyes were sharp as flint. It was Alexander Sinclair. Preston felt his throat go dry. Seeing the man on TV was one thing. Seeing him in person was like standing next to a reactor core. Mr. Sterling, Alexander said. His voice was deep, rolling like thunder. My daughter tells me you have found some interesting paperwork. Preston held up the briefcase, his hand trembling slightly. I know what you did in '98. You funded the rebels. I have the wire transfers. You trade my freedom for your silence. Alexander stared at him for a long moment. Then he started to laugh. It was a dry, humorless sound. You think that was a bribe? Alexander asked. It went to a paramilitary account, Preston shouted, trying to regain control. It was a ransom, Alexander said, his voice dropping to a terrifying whisper. In 1998, 3 aid workers were taken hostage in the jungle. Their governments refused to negotiate. One of those aid workers was my wife's younger sister. Your terrorist funding was me paying $5 million of my own money to save 3 lives because the politicians were too cowardly to act. Preston froze. That's a lie. It is a classified operation record, Julian interjected, pulling a document from his pocket. Declassified as of last year, if you knew where to look. If you leak those ledgers, Preston, you won't destroy my father. You will make him a global hero. The press will laud him as the man who saved innocent lives while the government did nothing. You will be the fool who tried to blackmail a savior. Preston took a step back. The leverage evaporated in his hands. He was holding nothing but smoke. But, Preston stammered, but the optics. The optics are that you are a desperate, small man, Alexander said, stepping closer. He loomed over Preston. You mistook my daughter's kindness for weakness. You mistook her silence for ignorance. And now you have annoyed me, and I am a very bad enemy to have. Sirens wailed in the distance, getting louder. Blue and red lights flashed against the hangar walls. Lydia. Preston turned to her, panic seizing his chest. What is that? "I told you to come alone, Preston," Lydia said, her eyes sad but firm. "I didn't say I would. I called the FBI. You set me up. You tried to blackmail my family," Lydia said. "That's a felony. Add it to the fraud, the embezzlement, and the bribery. It's over." The FBI SUVs screeched onto the tarmac. Agents poured out, weapons drawn. "Preston Sterling!" an agent shouted. "Hands in the air!" Preston looked at the agents, then back at Lydia. He saw the woman he had married, the woman he had discarded. She wasn't looking at him with anger anymore. She was looking at him with pity. "Why?" Preston whispered. "I made you a somebody." "No, Preston," Lydia said, as the agents grabbed his arms and cuffed him. "I was always somebody. You just never bothered to ask who." The arrest at Teterboro Airfield didn't just make the news. It consumed the news cycle for weeks. The image of Preston Sterling, once the golden boy of the tech world, the man on the cover of Wired and Forbes, being shoved into the back of an FBI vehicle in handcuffs, became the defining photo of the decade. For Lydia, the moment the heavy doors of the SUV slammed shut, sealing her husband away, there was no surge of triumph. There was no cinematic swell of music. There was only a profound, exhausting silence. The wind whipped across the tarmac, biting through her coat, and she realized she was shivering. Not from cold, but from the sudden release of 5 years of accumulated tension. Julian walked over and placed a heavy hand on her shoulder. He didn't say, "I told you so." He didn't gloat. He simply stood there, a solid wall against the wind, reminding her without words that she was no longer standing alone. "It's done, Liddy," he said softly. "Is it?" she whispered, watching the convoy of police lights fade into the distance. "I feel like I just woke up from a coma." "Then let's get you some coffee," Julian said. "Real coffee, not that swill Preston drank." The trial began 4 months later at the Daniel Patrick Moynihan United States Courthouse in Manhattan. It was billed as the United States versus Preston Sterling, but the press called it the Sterling Collapse. Lydia hadn't planned to attend. She wanted to stay in the quiet sanctuary of her temporary apartment, far away from the cameras. But her lawyer, the formidable lead counsel from the Sinclair team, advised her otherwise. "The jury needs to see the human cost," he had said. "They need to see the woman he underestimated." So, Lydia went. Every day. She sat in the front row behind the prosecution, wearing simple dark colors. She sat with her back straight, her hands folded in her lap, her face an unreadable mask. Preston looked terrible. Prison had not agreed with him. The bespoke suits were gone, replaced by ill-fitting court attire. His skin was sallow, his eyes darting nervously around the room. Every time he looked at the gallery, his eyes sought Lydia's. He looked at her with a mix of hatred and desperate pleading, as if expecting her to suddenly stand up and stop the proceedings. But the most damaging blow didn't come from the forensic accountants or the FBI agents. It came from Jessica. On the 10th day of the trial, Jessica took the stand. She had been granted immunity in exchange for her testimony, but the deal hadn't saved her social standing. She looked tired, stripped of her glamour. "Ms. Davis," the prosecutor asked, pacing in front of the jury box, "can you describe the conversation you had with Mr. Sterling on the night of December 14th? Jessica gripped the railing of the witness stand. Her voice trembled. He told me that Lydia was a useful idiot." That was his phrase. He said she was the perfect cover because nobody would suspect a boring housewife of looking at the books. He laughed about it. He said he was going to leave her with nothing but the debt from the credit cards he opened in her name. A gasp went through the courtroom. The jurors, 12 ordinary citizens, looked from Jessica to Preston with open disgust. Preston slammed his hand on the table. "She's lying!" She's bitter because I dumped her. Order! Mr. Sterling, sit down! Judge Harrison roared, banging his gavel. Jessica didn't flinch. She looked directly at Preston. And he told me about the bribes. He said, "Business is war, Jessica, and in war, you kill or you die." He thought he was Napoleon, but really, he was just a thief. The cross-examination by Preston's defense team was brutal, but the damage was done. The jury didn't see a titan of industry. They saw a small, insecure man who bullied women to feel powerful. When the verdict finally came down, the courtroom was so quiet you could hear the hum of the air conditioning. We, the jury, find the defendant, Preston Sterling, guilty on all counts. Guilty. 14 times over. Wire fraud, securities fraud, tax evasion, attempted extortion. Preston didn't scream. He didn't fight. He just slumped in his chair, the air leaving his lungs in a long, defeated hiss. It was the sound of a balloon finally deflating. Judge Harrison didn't mince words during the sentencing hearing a week later. "Mr. Sterling, you had every advantage in life. You had talent, you had opportunity, and you had a loyal partner. Instead of building something of value, you chose greed. You chose to destroy the lives of those around you for an extra percentage point on a quarterly report. That is not business. That is predation." The sentence was 25 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole for at least 20. As the bailiffs moved to shackle him, Preston turned one last time. "Lydia," he shouted, his voice cracking. "Lydia, tell them about the company. I built it. It's mine." Lydia stood up. She looked at the man she had vowed to love and cherish. She felt a pang of pity, not for the criminal he was, but for the man he could have been if he hadn't been so hollow inside. She didn't speak to him. She just turned her back and walked out of the courtroom, the heavy oak doors closing behind her with a final, resonant thud. With Preston in prison and his assets seized, the fate of Sterling Dynamics hung in the balance. The stock price was trading for pennies. Creditors were circling like sharks in bloody water. The board of directors had resigned en masse to avoid liability. Technically, via the divorce settlement and the restitution orders, Lydia was now the majority shareholder of the company that bore her ex-husband's name. The financial advisors, men in grey suits who spoke in acronyms, told her to liquidate. "Sell the parts," they said. "The brand is toxic. Sell the patents to Google, sell the real estate to developers, and take the cash. You could walk away with $40, maybe $50 million clear. It's the smart play." Julian agreed. "It's a mess, Lydia. Burn it down and walk away. You don't need the headache." But Lydia couldn't stop thinking about Sarah, the receptionist. She couldn't stop thinking about the engineers she had met at the holiday parties, the ones who talked passionately about solar efficiency and battery storage, not stock prices. They were innocent. They were victims of Preston's greed just as much as she was. 3 days after the sentencing, Lydia drove her sedan to the glass tower of Sterling Dynamics. The lobby was somber. The usual buzz of activity was gone. Employees moved slowly, speaking in hushed tones, carrying boxes. They were expecting layoffs. They were expecting the end. When Lydia walked in, the silence deepened. She wasn't the waitress wife anymore. She was the woman who had taken down the king. She was the Sinclair heiress. She walked up to the security desk. Sarah was there, looking red-eyed and exhausted. "Mrs. Sterling," Sarah stammered. We didn't know you were coming. The elevators are locked off." "It's Ms. Sinclair, Sarah," Lydia said gently. "And unlock them, please. I'm calling a town hall meeting, now." Sarah blinked. A town hall? Everyone?" "Everyone," Lydia said. "Janitors, interns, VPs. Everyone in the atrium in 15 minutes." 15 minutes later, the massive glass atrium was packed. 300 people stood shoulder to shoulder. The atmosphere was thick with anxiety. They looked at Lydia, who stood on a small riser near the fountain, holding a microphone. Julian stood off to the side, his arms crossed, watching his sister with a skeptical but curious expression. Lydia looked out at the sea of faces. She saw fear. She saw resentment. She saw resignation. "I know what you're thinking," Lydia began, her voice amplified through the atrium. "You're thinking, here comes the ex-wife to strip the copper out of the walls and fire us all so she can buy a yacht." A ripple of uncomfortable laughter moved through the crowd. "I don't blame you for thinking that," Lydia continued, "because that's what Preston would have done. That's what the bankers told me to do. They told me this company is dead. They told me the name Sterling is poison." She paused. She looked at the giant silver S logo mounted on the wall behind her. "They're right," she said. "The name Sterling is poison." A collective gasp went through the room. People exchanged terrified glances. This was it. The shutdown. "So," Lydia said, her voice strengthening, "we're not going to be Sterling Dynamics anymore." She signaled to a maintenance worker standing by the wall. "Take it down." The worker hesitated, then grabbed a crowbar. With a screech of metal, he pried the silver S off the wall. It clattered to the marble floor with a loud clang. "Preston built a company on lies," Lydia addressed the crowd. "He lied to the government, he lied to the shareholders, and he lied to you. He cut funding for the renewable energy division, the Green Project, because he said it wasn't profitable enough. He wanted quick cash from defense contracts." She stepped closer to the edge of the riser. "I have spent the last week looking at the Green Project files. The battery technology you were developing? It's brilliant. It could change the way we power cities. It's real. It's honest work." "But we have no money," a voice shouted from the back. "The accounts are frozen." "I have money," Lydia said simply. "I have the settlement money, and I have the Sinclair family trust." She saw Julian straighten up, his eyes widening. He hadn't known she was going to do this. "I am reinvesting everything into this company," Lydia announced. "But there are conditions. First, we are pivoting 100% to renewable energy. No more weapons, no more spyware. Second, we are restructuring." She took a deep breath. "I am not going to be the CEO. I don't know how to run a tech company. I know how to spot a liar, but I don't know how to code. We are going to hire a CEO chosen by the board, and the board will be you." The silence was absolute. "I am turning this company into an employee-owned cooperative," Lydia said. "Every single one of you who stays will receive equity. The profits won't go to a mansion in the Hamptons. They will go back to you and back into the research. If we win together. If we fail together. But we will not fail because of greed." For a solid 10 seconds, nobody moved. The concept was so foreign to the corporate culture they were used to. Then, Sarah, the receptionist, started to clap. It was a slow, lonely sound at first. Then the man next to her joined in. Then the engineers. Then the managers. Within moments, the atrium was thundering with applause. It wasn't the polite applause of a corporate event. It was the raw, emotional cheering of people who had just been pulled back from the edge of a cliff. Julian walked up to the riser as Lydia stepped down. He was shaking his head, a wry smile on his face. "You're crazy," he shouted over the noise. "Dad is going to lose his mind. You're giving away the equity. That's anti-capitalist." "It's human, Julian," Lydia shouted back, smiling for the first time in months. "And besides, happy employees work harder. It's a long-term investment." "You're not a waitress anymore, are you?" Julian asked, looking at her with a new kind of respect. "I never was just a waitress," Lydia said. "I was just waiting." 6 months later. The rebranding was complete. The company was now called Lumina Tech. The stock wasn't soaring yet, but it was stable. The press had turned from scandalous headlines to cautiously optimistic pieces about the socialist experiment in Silicon Alley. Lydia sat in her new office, a modest room on the ground floor, not the penthouse suite. She was packing a box. She wasn't staying to run the day-to-day operations. She had kept her word. She had hired a brilliant female engineer from MIT to take the CEO role. Lydia remained as the chairwoman of the trust, a guardian role to ensure the company never lost its way again. But today was her last day in the office for a while. She picked up a framed photo from her desk. It wasn't a picture of Preston. It was a picture of her mother, taken years ago, before the Sinclair money had complicated everything. Her mother looked happy, wind-blown, free. Lydia placed the photo in the box. She walked out to the parking lot. The sun was setting over the city, casting long, golden shadows across the pavement. The air smelled of autumn, crisp, clean, full of change. Her car was waiting. Not a limousine, not a town car, just her reliable sedan, packed with a suitcase and a map. She was going to travel, not to the resorts in the Maldives or the chalets in Aspen, where she had spent so many hollow vacations with Preston. She was going to drive across the country. She wanted to see the Grand Canyon. She wanted to eat at diners in small towns where nobody knew her name. She wanted to hike in the redwoods. She wanted to find out who Lydia was when she wasn't fighting a war. As she unlocked the car, a black SUV pulled up. The window rolled down. It was Alexander Sinclair. He looked older, but the fierce intelligence in his eyes hadn't dimmed. He looked at the modest car, then at his daughter. "You're really leaving?" Alexander asked. "For a while," Lydia said. "The company is in good hands, Dad. And I need fresh air." Alexander nodded slowly. "You did good, Lydia. I didn't think you had the stomach for the fight. I was wrong." "I didn't want the fight, Dad," Lydia said. "I just wanted the truth. But I learned that sometimes you have to fight to get it to the surface." "Preston sent a letter from prison," Alexander mentioned, his voice devoid of emotion. "He wants to apologize. He wants a visitation." Lydia paused, her hand on the car door handle. She looked at the skyline, thinking of the man rotting in a cell. She thought of the years she wasted, trying to be small enough to fit into his world. "Burn it," Lydia said. "You don't want to read it?" "I know what it says," Lydia replied. "It says, 'I want.' That's all he ever knew how to say. I'm done listening to what Preston wants." She got into the car and started the engine. Alexander watched her, a rare look of pride crossing his stoic face. "Drive safe, kid," he said. "I will," Lydia answered. She pulled out of the lot, merging onto the highway. She turned on the radio. A classic rock song was playing, something with a driving beat and lyrics about the open road. She rolled the window down. The wind rushed in, tangling her hair. She checked the rearview mirror one last time. The glass tower of Lumina Tech reflected the setting sun, shining like a beacon. Behind it, the shadowy memory of the Sterling Empire was fading into the dusk. Lydia smiled. She accelerated, the car humming beneath her. She wasn't running away this time. She was driving toward something. She was free. Preston Sterling spent the rest of his life in a 6-8 cell, telling anyone who would listen that he used to be a king. But nobody listened. He learned the hard way that power isn't about the suit you wear or the money you scream about. True power is quiet. It's the dignity of the waitress you ignored, the wife you underestimated, and the family you never saw coming. Lydia didn't just win a divorce case, she reclaimed her identity. She proved that while you can steal money, you can never steal class. And sometimes, the person holding the winning hand is the one who hasn't played a single card. Until the very end. Wow, talk about instant karma. If you enjoyed seeing Preston get exactly what he deserved, smash that like button right now. What would you do if you found out your partner was hiding millions? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a story about justice served cold. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.